Hello creatives, and welcome to our first video on inspirations around us. As an artist myself, I find that sometimes I need a little help getting inspiration, ideas, or just get past that creative block that can stop me. These episodes are to help bring that inspiration to life by looking at other artists' work, creative projects, and techniques that can help you get going. In today's video, I wanted to share one of my biggest influences, legendary fantasy illustrator Brian Froud. But before we dive into his works, here's a little background about Brian Froud. Brian Froud was born May 6, 1947. He's a British illustrator who mostly is known for his illustrated book, The Fairies, which is a creative collaboration with Alan Lee. He studied art at the Maidstone College of Art and graduated with a diploma in graphic design. He spent the first 5 years of his career as a commercial artist before moving to Devon in 1975. It would be his work Once Upon a Time, Some Contemporary Illustrators of Fantasy, a survey of modern British illustrators 1976, and his 1977 anthology The Land of Fraud, which would push his career even further. These two works in particular caught the attention of, in my opinion, the greatest puppeteer and storyteller, Jim Henson. He sought out Froud in order to collaborate with him in his legendary work, The Dark Crystal, as a conceptual designer for the feature film. This is the first work that brought Froud to my attention. His beautiful collaboration with Jim Henson created a dark and fantastical look which would be ingrained in my mind to this day. The first Froud book I ever bought was Froud's The World of the Dark Crystal, which shows off the concept and sketches for the amazing film, as well as displaying the characters in all their glory. Froud created this companion book, and I am forever grateful for his choice. Also, in 2011, he partnered with Brian Holgan, Alex Sheikman, and Lizzie John to create the Dark Crystal creation myths to help us die-hard fans to understand how it all began, until he finally returned to working with the Jim Henson Company to create the Netflix original series The Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, the prequel to The Dark Crystal, providing that after 45 years this story and Brian Froud's designs remain relevant to this day. Brian Froud continued to work with the Jim Henson Company, providing conceptual art for works such as The Labyrinth, The Storyteller, and push his career into motion pictures, where he would go on to work on projects such as Little Nemo Adventures in Slumberland, The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, and P.J. Coggan's live-action Peter Pan. Thanks to his works on the Labyrinth motion picture, he formed a literary and artistic partnership with the Labyrinth screenwriter Terry Jones, where they would produce books such as The Goblins of Labyrinth, which contain the concept art of Labyrinth, as well as Lady Cottington's pressed fairy book, which won Froud quite a few awards. Froud has also graced us with books such as Fairies, Trolls, and many more to provide us with many different ideas and conceptual designs. Now, let's dive into these illustrations together. Alright, so I wanted to start off with the first book I ever bought, Brian Froud, which was The World of the Dark Crystal. Now, what I like the most about this book is the fact that it gives you a lot of the conceptual art, like pretty much all the sketches they came up with, and what I like about it is it really breaks down. So if you look at some of these sketches, let me get a little bit closer. You can see all the sketchy lines, and you can kind of see how Brian Froud actually made these creatures. I think that that's actually pretty amazing, considering that sometimes I wonder how they built some of these things and how they came up with some of the ideas and some of the symbols, and it basically goes over all the things that you need to know how Brian Froud designed it, how he built his characters. The thing that I always find helpful is things like this, where Brian Froud actually goes over how he can actually map out a character, all the measurements that he went through in order to design this. So if you look at the Mystics, you can actually see he kind of design the skeletal structure, also how all the mystics are kind of divided by all these specific relay points, and then he was able to build on top of them. I think that that's actually a really great way to show off a book such like this is how the creatures were built. You have also stills from the actual props, such as some of the mystic wands, and these concept sketches for like the Skeksis, which is a little bit of a slightly rougher sketch, which would later become the costumes that we know and love. And then you have all the concepts of the dresses and the basic colors. And some of these sketches, what I like about it is you can tell that they were really rough. They were just there to get you an idea. And then eventually they would become like these really great creatures and the iconic sketches and the iconic characters that we now know. And yeah, I honestly don't know what else to say about this book. Is that I always use it as a reference especially when I'm doing fantasy work, is, well, I want like an intricate pattern, but I'm not quite sure. I like looking through this book and saying, well, this is a kind of a cool symbol. Let me see if I can't use that as my base and then build on top of it, or remove, even take something that's really intricate like this knotting work, and I'm like, oh, that's, if I think that this looks really, really nice, I take it as a base and then I either remove or add to it. Or even some of the details in the face of the mystics, some of these swirls are really beautiful, and they're a really great key point or something that you could integrate into your designs. The other cool thing that I like about this is it basically lays out the history of the mystics and about all these characters, and gives them a lore that you can kind of build on and interpret and try to understand. He gives you all the symbols, what they mean, why they're there, why they're added into the film, and it helps you appreciate a little bit more how much work actually went into this. These weren't just characters that Brian Froud and Jim Henson just kind of went, well, yeah, they look cool, let's go. There's a meaning behind everything that gets put into them. Every Skeksis has a background and a reason why they do certain things, even if we don't really pay attention to all the individual Skeksis. They each have their own background story. Like each mystic, like the chanter, the alchemist, they each have their own story, their own purpose, their own jobs within this community. And the Gelflings, they go through some of the different types of Gelflings and the traits that are associated with the Gelflings. It makes this book a really great way to kind of inspire you and helps you really understand that even when you're just designing a character, the background and why they're doing certain things and why basically the why of their actual being helps you create a design that is much more purposeful rather than just, oh, this looks good, let's just add that. When a character is created and it has a purpose behind each strand of hair, or each the horns, why they have horns, or why they have a particular design on their lapel or on their wrist, it helps create that character and helps you be able to connect better with your audience. So that's some of Brian Froud's works that he did for the Dark Crystal. Now, another great book that I have, which is probably his book that he's most well known for, it's Fairies. Now, the Fairies book, this is actually a really, really great book to have when you're wanting to learn about fairies, because he literally goes over the different types of fairies that there are, the different types of goblins, and gives you a great sketch as to the background of each individual fairy. So instead of just saying, oh, I'm going to draw like a particular type of fairy, like he goes over the different fairy ways, and let's see, like some of the fairy lore that goes behind it. He gives you and brings that information into you. And again, Brian Froud is definitely one of those artists that creates characters with purpose. Like, he doesn't just draw the character, he thinks of who they are, what's their motivation, what do they want to do, what do they want from life, and kind of brings that to the forefront. This book, again, because it has all this like sketched out looking pages, it helps me a lot with layout and how to build certain aspects or certain characters or certain scenes. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like Brian Froud so much, is that he really helped me understand the building of a character or building of a theme, and the way that he draws with these exaggerations of lines. He kind of throws proportion out of the window, says, now, do you know what? If it's a baby, yeah, it's going to have proper proportions, but these are my creatures. If I want him to have really floppy ears, a squished face, and an extremely long body, well, let's do it. If I wanted to have an eye in the mushroom, well, you know what? My creature, and let's do it. And he helped me understand that sometimes I just need to let go and be able to create the way that I want to. Like a fairy with frog legs. Why not? Put it all together. And you can see that in his sketches that he's pretty loose with it, and then he kind of sculpts out the characters by just continuing to draw. My one of my best friends, who's also an illustrator and artist, she actually creates things in the same way, and no surprise, she was actually named after a character from the Dark Crystal. So it was predetermined that she was going to be able to sculpt in the same way that Brian Froud does, which is a skill that I particularly don't have. I don't really sculpt out my characters, but I definitely design them. I definitely think of who they are and the intention behind each stroke, and each thing that I add into them isn't just because it looks pretty. It does have to look aesthetically pleasing to me, but it has to also have purpose. If I'm going to add a tattoo onto a person, it's not just going to be like any random tattoo. I try and think of, well, who is this person? What kind of tattoo would they have? Like, if it's a person who's traveled a lot, they're going to have probably a lot of tattoos from different styles, not just one single style. If it's a person that's a little bit more stationary, they're going to have probably one particular style of tattoo that they're going to like. A person who is more well-traveled will have a tendency to have a more worldly look to them. We're going to look at also another book that I thoroughly enjoy. If I can get it off my table. Sorry, guys. It's taking a little bit longer. There you go. It's Trolls. I particularly enjoy drawing trolls. I think they're fun to draw, and you can do quite a bit with them. So in Brian Froud's troll book, again, in the similar way that this book reminds me a bit more of the Dark Crystal book, it goes over the different symbols around trolls, the history, the lore behind trolls, and what they mean and what they represent, and you can kind of see some of the influences and some of the creatures that he's had in other feature films like The Labyrinth. The Labyrinth has a lot of trolls and goblins in there, and you can kind of see these beautiful puppet creatures that he's helped create. A lot of these designs that he's done over the years have influenced a lot of creatures, and you can kind of see also some of their looks in some of the more recent work. Like in the Storyteller book, there's actually a porcupine man, and I was looking at the series Fringe, and they have a porcupine man that looks a little bit similar. And even in the new Witcher series from Netflix, there's a particular character which is Ciri's father in the TV series. He's got a little bit of a look of a porcupine man, and if you actually put the porcupine man that Brian Froud designed for the Storyteller and the porcupine man in the Netflix series Witcher, you can definitely see the influence there. So to say that Brian Froud doesn't have an influence today would be understating his work considerably, considering that most of his work has kind of been ingrained in a lot of people of my generation, considering we grew up with his films. We grew up with this like really dark and eerie yet playful style, and it's a style that I personally try and imbue in my artwork. Like, you look at these little creatures and all the details are thought of, and the fact that he can organize these books and actually explain why certain, like, basically categorize all the different trolls and fairies into specific categories that fit within the lore, means that this illustrator actually thinks about what he does before putting it to paper. I'm sure that, like most of us, he doodles a lot, but when he creates a character, the character is well thought out. Sorry, I'm losing myself a little bit because I do, like I said, these are books that I often have. I always have them next to my drawing desk because they are books that I like to refer to, especially when I get stuck when I'm designing a character and I need something that has a little bit of a fantastical design, or basically to help me get unstuck from a creative design. I look at the different scroll works that he puts even in these backgrounds, or the characters, the expressions, some of their clothing that he's designed on them, some of the weaponry and the color palette as well, just to kind of help me get going. It's definitely something that I suggest to most artists, especially when they're starting out, is with your art supplies, have books that will help push you in the direction that you're wanting to go. Like this is, like, even just the shadowing in this and the wrinkles around the eyes are just beautiful details. The wrinkles in the hands and the toes, and then all the little patchwork. There's a lot of detail and a lot of care that goes into his creatures. Definitely someone that I personally admire and will forever hope that I can meet this man. I hope you all enjoyed this kind of look through the Brian Froud work, and I hope that it inspired you to look even further into his work. He has a lot of more amazing stuff that I wasn't able to show you today, and definitely he's worth taking a look. I thank you very much for joining us, and don't forget to like and subscribe so that we can continue providing you content, and so that we can get better at providing you with content. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.